In the third video of this course, we will take a look at several additional scenarios when it comes to exchanging pieces and what these exchanges mean in strategic terms. So far, we have looked at three typical scenarios: exchanging good for a bad piece, exchanging queens, and at the same time transposing from middle game to end game, and also exchanging the strongest piece. So here, and this is something that I also mentioned in the previous video, we will start with one quite common scenario when your opponent offers you a piece trade, and of course you have an option to accept it, or you can keep the tension. And I talked about this, that a lot of especially inexperienced players, they tend to trade pieces indiscriminately, basically without looking whether the exchange is good or not, just thinking that if they exchange a piece, it will make their position simpler to play. And as there are good exchanges, there are also bad exchanges. We, of course, have realized this fact by now. So, of course, if you make a lot of exchanges like this, especially if these exchanges are not on your terms, which also we will talk about in this video, then you are likely to make a mistake, or even more than one mistake, when you exchange pieces like that. And so I would like to look at several examples where keeping the tension was the right course of action. So if your opponent offers you a piece trade, just as in this example right here, when black played the move bishop d6, you have a choice. Basically here you have three choices. You can trade the bishops immediately on d6, you can keep the tension with the move bishop g5, or you could trade the bishops but on your own terms, which means that you could play a move like queen d2, and after the bishop takes on f4, then you can take with the queen. So since the player who played with white was quite unaware of some subtleties in this type of pawn structure, the isolated queen's pawn, he thought that trading the bishops would be okay, and he played the move bishop g3, which actually is even worse than all other moves, simply because he's giving up a tempo to his opponent. And after bishop takes and queen d6, black got excellent counterplay against the d4 pawn, and you know, once you trade a pair of pieces in these structures, it's usually much easier to play with black, and he can even play for advantage thanks to this structural weakness. So instead of this, of course, the recommended course of action, the right strategic decision in these types of positions is, of course, to keep the tension with the move bishop g5. Not only that, but it's also a pin, so it might be threatening a move like d5 or knight e4, and most probably black should retreat with his bishop to e7, admitting that he has lost the tempo. So even if this was not the case, bishop g5 is the right move, simply because, as I said, there is a strategic recommendation in such positions. Keep more pieces on the board and try to leave black with the lack of space. Now, in the game, as we saw, black had enough space after the bishop's exchange, but I also want to talk about the third option, which is queen d2. And this is like, let's say, the mid-road, because you don't really want to trade the bishops, but if you, let's say if there was a pawn on h6 for black and you can't really play bishop g5, so if you for some reason have to trade the bishops, the best way to do it is like this: queen d2, and then you take with the queen, and now there is a big difference in this position compared to the one that we had here, because in the game black had the active queen, and he immediately was ready to play rook d8, whereas here, if we play queen d2, white is the one with the more active queen, and he's the one maybe who will be quicker in pushing the d pawn. Rook d1 and d5 looks very logical, and so by playing this way he would have traded the bishops on his own terms. So this is a very important point that you should keep in mind. If you see that an exchange is inevitable, don't exchange immediately. Try to see if there is a better way to exchange the piece. Let's see another example where, only this time for black, where black has a choice whether to take on e5 with the knight and keep the tension, or take with the bishop and trade the bishops. Now, in the game, black took with the bishop, and this was a clear mistake, and we will shortly see why. Now, why did he do this? Why did he decide to take with the bishop? His logic was that if he forces the trade of dark square bishops, then white's dark squares will be weaker. And while this is true, it's also true that black's dark squares and pieces on dark squares will also be more exposed. And we will see how this happens. So the bishop takes e5, white played bishop e2. Now this exchange is forced, but this is kind of what black wanted. So he wanted to exchange the bishops and now bring his knight to e5. The problem here, though, is that d6 pawn is exposed now, and also white can play this excellent move c5, undermining the knight on e5, which is kind of the pride of black's position. And after this, black's whole concept of trading the dark square bishops pretty much falls apart. So a very costly mistake. He simply didn't realize that by trading dark square bishops, his own dark squares will be just as weak. So instead of this, if he takes with the knight, he can now play a move like queen e7, and everything is under control. Since he has the dark square bishop still, he controls e5, f6, and it's also easy to protect d6 pawn if it's necessary with a move like rook d8. So it's approximately equal position here. And also I should mention that d takes e5, while at first it might look tempting, it's just not good, because bishop c5 wins the exchange, and probably not enough compensation for black in that case. So while this was a slightly more complex decision for black, it still shows that it's important to weigh all pros and cons when you make such exchanging decisions. Let's see one more example where keeping the tension was better than trading pieces. What would you play in this position with white? I think most people would just automatically play rook d1. Then black responds with rook d7, and while this endgame seems to be slightly better for white, this duo of queen and knight, especially if the knight breaks free, because right now it's in a bad position, but this duo is generally coordinates quite well. And here it's not so easy for white to get some tangible advantage. Also, another reason is that black king is quite safe now. It's hard to attack the king, whereas if the rooks were still on the board, the king would remain unsafe. So white tried with something like queen d3 and bishop d4, but after the move queen d6, black got just enough counterplay, and the position was equal. So instead of this apparently logical move rook d1, white could have put black under much more pressure with a move like rook e1. And the idea here is to, as I said, to take advantage of exposed black king, and also some discoordination between his pieces, and prepare the move like f5 with some tactical ideas. Also g7 pawn, as we see, is weak, so if black plays a move like f6, then e6 pawn will be weak. And just keeping the tension like this, no matter what black does here, let's say if he plays rook d7, this would give white very serious positional pressure. Now he's threatening to play f5 because the knight on e8 is would be under attack, and after some move like knight f6, we can play simply a3, save the king on a2, and later put pressure. We can put pressure both on the king side and on the queen side. So basically, you can feel that it's not easy for black to play, because he always has to watch out for his king's safety. And the second thing is why I think white made the exchange in the first place, is that he thought that if he doesn't play rook d1, black will play rook d7 himself. But what good is this file? I mean, what is black going to do with this file? He does control it, but he has no infiltration points. He cannot play rook d4 or rook d3 or anything like that. Also, trying to double up there will not lead to anything concrete for black. White can just play a move like king c2 and continue with his own plan. So a very important point, and we will also cover it in our next topic, avoiding simplification. A lot of times a trade that looks good because it kind of simplifies your task, your position, is actually not the best choice, because keeping the tension gives you more chances to play for an advantage. Now, let us take a look at several other subtopics when it comes to exchanging pieces. The next one, and we will look from black's perspective, is quite obvious just from looking at the position. Black has the bishop pair. And when you have the bishop pair, in most positions, this is a sort of a slight advantage, let's say. Now, the problem for black in this position is that he is down a pawn. So he should mostly use his bishop pair as a means to compensate for his pawn. He can't really play for an advantage. So what would you play in this position? This is a very this is sort of a critical moment for black, because white might be threatening to trade some pieces. He might also try to bring his knight to d6 or play knight a5, and it's really important for us now to make a good decision. So the best move for black is bishop f8. Now in the game, white or black took on e3, and this was a clear mistake. He gave up his bishop pair. But let us now take a look at the move bishop f8. b4 allows rook takes e3, so that's not the solution. And basically there is no good way to protect the pawn on c5. But okay, black, if white goes knight a5, he's getting c6 pawn in return. But now the position has kind of opened up, and the bishop pair here is a great asset for black. It gives him an opportunity to equalize, to basically not experience any problems, because bishops are well placed and control a lot of squares, and it's not difficult to imagine that black can hold this position. Now, why was this bishop takes e3 a mistake, a wrong exchange? First of all, we don't have the bishop pair anymore, and secondly, if he was to trade any of these bishops, he should have traded the other bishop, the light square bishop, because this light square bishop is quite useless. Of course, we could put it on d3, but then it just means that we're down a pawn, and white can push b4, a4, and so on. What black's intention was with this exchange was to take control of the d file. So since there is no knight on c4 anymore, his plan was to go rook d2. But this turned out to be an ineffective plan, and the problem was that here white had a very strong move, rook d1, basically ignoring black's threat to take the pawn. Of course, trading the rooks would be very bad. The endgame is just lost. So after this, rook d8 and rook d7, white picked up a pawn and he got a winning position. So it was quite a wrong decision here to trade the bishops. Black misevaluated several factors, such as the importance of the second rank and also the passivity of his light squared bishop. So exchanges are basically, or decisions to exchange pieces are basically trade-offs. You have to figure out whether your pros are stronger than the cons, and of course this takes some experience, but definitely a move like bishop takes e3 shows that black was completely oblivious or completely underestimated white's resources in this position. Now let's see another example with the bishop pair, and this time black made the right decision. So an 1800 player here realized that trading the bishops would help white activate his knight, and also that in that case the bishop against the knight would be less effective than if black has the bishop pair. So he played the move bishop c8, and this was an excellent decision. Now black has the bishop pair, e3 and c3 are potential infiltration points for either rook or the bishop. And here, let's say if white plays bishop d3 to bring the knight to e4, black goes b5. First of all, he takes away c4 square, but secondly, he also prepares to employ his queenside majority, so he can play a6, c5, and later at some point also prepares c4, and this would give him almost a decisive advantage. So once white put the knight on e4, we have a position, we can compare it to the one where the bishops are traded. So if the bishops were traded on e4 at the start, the position is very similar to this one. We can look at it one more time. So knight on e4. The difference is only that there is a bishop on c8 and the bishop on d3. But this fact works in black's favor because he can now activate the bishop again, put it on d5, and as we said, prepare this a6, c5, c4 queenside majority attack. Of course, the position is still playable for white, but definitely inferior, because he cannot do the same with his own majority on the king side. His king will become too exposed. So a very good decision by black to keep the bishops and increase his winning chances like this. Next example is also an example of a good decision. This was in an endgame, and also a position with the bishop pair. So here, what would you play with black? Let's take a look at this endgame a bit more closely. So one thing that you notice immediately is that the knight on h4 is completely out of the game. And black has the bishop pair. Okay, his pawn structure is slightly inferior, but that's not important. It's more important that he has the initiative and he can try to attack white's pawns on the queen side based on this misplaced knight on h4 that needs like 5 moves to get back into the game. So how do we do this? Well, black made a timely exchange with the move bishop d5. Basically, okay, so he's forcing white to exchange, of course. White has no choice. This is basically transformation of advantage. So from the bishop pair advantage now, he gets this very important activity with the king, where he targets, as we said, the weaknesses on the queen side. So white's only choice is to play like this, king c2. And then black also has foreseen this and prepared the move a5, an excellent move, which finally allows black to destroy white's queen side. The problem for white is that he cannot play the move king b2 here, because now the second weakness, the one on the king side, decides. And really, this is a perfect example how the knight on h4 is completely out of the game. It cannot help its pawns, so white is just picking up pretty much all of these pawns. And therefore, after bishop c5, black is just winning first on a3, then on a5, one way or another. So this is how the game continued. Okay, and he picked up both pawns and won the game. So sometimes you can see trading the bishops and getting rid of the bishop pair is a good decision. It all depends what you get in return. As we said many times, it's exchanging pieces is a game of pros and cons. You get something and you give something. You just have to figure out if what you give is less than what you get. Okay, now we look at another scenario that's actually quite typical. Your opponent has more material. So in this case, white is up a pawn. A well-known strategic recommendation in such cases is not to trade pieces, to keep the tension. And we have a game by a 1600 player who, in this position, played the move bishop b5, which of course is a wrong decision because trading a pair of bishops here helps white. Now we will see later what happened, but let's first see what black should do. So of course he should play a move like bishop d7, and firstly we don't trade another pair of pieces, which makes white's conversion of white's advantage or material advantage more difficult. Secondly, since we kept all these pieces on the board, it's very difficult for white to push his pawns, and this is basically his only advantage in this position, his extra pawns on the queen side. Because if we keep more pieces, then the more pawns he pushes, the more weaknesses he leaves, and his king is on that side of the board, so it's quite risky. And the third reason why bishop d7 is a good decision is that we prepare the move f5. And we may need to bring our rook back to f8, but definitely you see how strong this move can be if we can open up the f-file and attack white from that side of the board as well. So here, while black may not have full compensation, he definitely has some compensation for the pawn. However, by playing bishop b5, he made white very happy because now he got rid of his passive bishop on c4. And also another important decision came after the move queen d3. Would you trade the queens or not? And I hope that your answer is no. By using the same logic, the more pieces we trade, the easier for white it is to convert his extra pawn, especially in the rook endgame where he can just push his queenside pawns. So black needs to keep his queen for counterplay, and still white is not completely safe with his king on that side of the board, and also his potentially exposed pawns on the king side. But what black did in this position, he traded the queens, and now pretty much after this, white has a technically winning position. He just brings his king to b3, pushes a4, and so on. And there is nothing that black can do. So when you have a material deficit, generally, you don't trade. Okay, Now another type of position and another sort of a rule of thumb. When you have a space advantage, try not to trade the pieces, or at least try not to make equal exchanges. Try to make exchanges which give you something in return. So in this position, white obviously has a space advantage. Also, he can increase it a bit, so not with the move bishop f1, but f4. And now he's forcing the knight back. He puts his bishop here, puts the other bishop there. A very comfortable position for white. He can put the bishop on d4 and just slowly grind his opponent down. Simply, there is no counterplay to speak of for black. He is probably hoping just for some tricks. But strategically speaking, his position is inferior. But white didn't play like this. He was concerned about the bishop on h3. He thought that for some reason this bishop can be dangerous, and he played the move bishop f1. But in playing that way, he allowed black first of all to trade his piece. So he traded one pair of pieces, which makes black's life a bit easier. The more pieces side with less space exchanges, the easier it is for that side to find good squares for its pieces. And then secondly, also, without even wanting to do it, he weakened his own king, because now the king doesn't have any defender. And it could have had the bishop on f3, as in this variation. And bishop on h3 is really not doing anything, you know. It's like a scarecrow. It's not really dangerous. So if he had played like that, he would have no worries around his king. But now, actually, after the move f5, his king might feel a bit unsafe, and he has to play definitely more precisely in that case. So definitely bishop f1 was an exchange that he didn't have to make. And shouldn't have made, because of this rule of thumb not to trade the pieces when you have extra space. So we talked about the bishop pair. Let's talk about bishops a little bit more. An additional topic here, which is also quite practically important, is opposite colored bishops. So of course the general notion is that a lot of endgames with opposite colored bishops are drawish. They're not drawn, all of them, but many of them have drawish tendencies. But also there are a lot of them that don't, and you have to know, let's say, which are the exceptions, in which endgames you are not guaranteed draw as a weaker side if you go into opposite colored bishop endgame. So in this position, while the material is still equal, white decided that his drawing chances would increase if he plays the move queen c6 and offers the queen trade. Of course, black doesn't have to accept it. But what if he does? Then we get into opposite colored bishop's endgame. Looks very drawish indeed, but actually what white underestimated is the move a4. And the point of this move is to fix the pawns on b2 and a3, which means that he's winning these two pawns by force. In the meantime, white will pick up the pawn on a4, but he's still going to lose the pawn in this operation. White hoped that this would still be enough to hold the game, because we know that there are a lot of opposite colored bishops endgames in which you can draw being down a pawn or even two. But this is not that kind of endgame, simply because once black activates his king, there's too many weaknesses for white. So not only does he have to worry about the b pawn, which will surely march forward, and then c6 will also be weak, but also there are weaknesses on f2 and on h3, and there's simply too many things to defend. As I said, c6 is a potential weakness too. So this is simply not that kind of drawn opposite colored bishop's endgame that we usually think about. So instead of this, he should have simply played the move Queen d3 and try to hold this position. With queens on the board, he has more chances for a perpetual check or to coordinate his queen and bishop. Something like queen e4, bishop f1, bishop d3 is a possibility. Or even try to trade the queens later in some better moment when he will not lose a pawn in an opposite colored bishop's endgame. And the last example that I would like to show, it's a position where not much is happening. It's still the opening, but it doesn't mean that one cannot make a mistake, a strategic mistake, so early. So in this position, what would you play with white? Now, if you would suggest for white to play e4, this would be good. This would be the right decision, because white doesn't have a pawn in the center, and since he has the knight on c3 and bishop on d3, it is only logical to play the move e4 and to gain some space in the center, activate his pieces. However, in the game, he played the move knight e5, and this move simply lacks any plan, in my view, because I really fail to see what white wants to accomplish with this move, besides just trading piece for, exchanging it for exchange's sake. We already played with the knight once. Why do we need to play twice? I don't see any benefit of this exchange on e5. Of course, we said e4 is the most logical and natural move. So knight e5 facilitates basically black's pressure on the c file, because now black made a good exchange. Bishop c7, it forces white to make an exchange, presumably on c7, and now you see this pressure on the c file is quite real. The knight has to move. Of course, the b4 was a mistake earlier on for white, but he should have taken this into account before he played knight e5. So the knight moves, and then black also gets the center, and this is a fantastic position for black. You cannot really hope for more out of the opening after 15 moves. So sometimes making such decisions, trading without a plan, is also it's better not to trade. It's better to play some move like rook c1 or rook e1 if you don't have a clear plan, because every trade leads you closer to the end of the game. And if the trade has no real purpose and you don't see any special benefit of it, it's better to keep the tension. Sorry, I made a mistake. Now I see. There was a threat of e5, so we cannot play rook e1 or rook c1. So now I understand actually why white played the move knight e5. He wanted to basically fight against the e5, e4 threat. So definitely a move like bishop h2 would be better in that sense if you don't play the move e4. But actually e4 is the right move because it also prevents this threat by black. So I do apologize for this oversight. And yeah, this would wrap up our discussion about piece exchanges. Sometimes when you think about strategic topics, you kind of forget about tactical details like this one, even so obvious. So the next topic that we will have is, as I said, related to this one. It will be still about exchanging pieces, but basically we will see some examples on why simplifying matters is not the right strategic decision, and we will also see some examples when it is possible that it is the right decision.